Guy on Indy presents the podcast. Today's topic, Malcolm X. Today's special guest, Dr. David Polizzi. Today's podcast is sponsored by Indy Filmmakers Forum at yahoo.com. Are you interested in professional production and live in the Midwest? Then contact Indy Filmmakers Forum at yahoo.com, the premier film networking group in the Midwest. Welcome back. We are here with Dr. David Polizzi discussing Malcolm X and his book, A Phenomenological Hermeneutic of Anti-Black Racism in the Autobiography of Malcolm X. Okay, Chapter 5, The Prison Years. David, please tell us a little bit about the time that Malcolm X had in prison and tell him a little bit of his life there in prison.
Well, he gets arrested and he's a normal inmate for a second. He gets into some trouble. He gets into the hole a few times for not being a very compliant person relative to that rather oppressive system. And during the earlier years, and it's really not the way it's portrayed in the movie. Mm-hmm. Spike Lee creates a character that's not really in the autobiography, or it's kind of a split of characters. At least in the research that I've done, it was his brothers that introduced him to the nation.
Right. Reginald, right?
Yeah.
Told him not to eat pork.
Yeah, and he reminds Malcolm, if I'm remembering correctly, that some of these ideas are not that different from the ideas that their parents taught them, years earlier. And so as he's struggling, he then meets with his brother and then ultimately meets people in the nation and ultimately...
first when he's in prison, he's affected by a character named Bimbi.
Yeah, Bimbi is...
And this is before the Nation of Islam.
Bimbi is somebody who tries to get him to be more serious about reading and language and stuff. There's also some discrepancy concerning where he was educationally. By most accounts that I've seen, he wasn't a bad student. He was always one of the better students. Malcolm, yes. And so this idea that he was like illiterate or something...
That was overplayed in the movie.
That's simply not...
That was played for effect, not for truth. I know that his daughter talks about that in the preface, that he could read.
Yes.
But Bimbi and being in prison led him to really commit to reading.
Right.
Bimbi was an atheist.
Right.
And one thing I want to cover in his prison years is the Heidegger concept of the name of the father. Mm-hmm. He changes his name. Maybe this is Alex Haley's doing as a literary thing, but he's known as Malcolm Little, and then he's known as Homeboy, and then he's known as Red, then he's known as Detroit Red, and then in prison, he's another name of the father. He takes on a new name, Satan.
Well, that's because, and this is as he's converting, where he's challenging, particularly the idea of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. Okay. Which, if one thinks of it historically, that would probably be rather a blue-eyed, blonde-haired individual living in Palestine.
Yeah. That's Caesar Borgia, by the way. Jesus Christ with the blonde hair and the blue eyes. That was the son of a pope called Caesar Borgia, and that's who they modeled the Renaissance Jesus after, and that we know as Jesus. But it's actually a pope's son.
Now, I guess there could have been Romans. There would have been Romans there. So, I mean, but it's not likely that we would have had that. And so this idea, he tries to challenge the ideas. And I think this is in the autobiography as well, but he makes a nice kind of philosophical argument where in the film I like this, where he's basically arguing with the prison chaplain. And what does he say? Something like, well, Jesus was white. Isn't it obvious? And he points to the photo or the painting. And Malcolm correctly states, well, it's obvious there, but that doesn't answer the question. Okay,
so he While in prison, he gets introduced to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He's given a picture by his brother.
Yeah, he doesn't meet him until he's paroled, obviously.
No, but
right.
he's introduced to the figure of him as in a picture.
Right.
And so he looks at the picture and prays and learns to pray in prison. What is his religion conversion? Is it before or after prison? When he?
It's during prison.
During prison, and he becomes instantly very evangelical, doesn't he?
Yeah, but
like he's telling other prisoners about him.
But you have to keep in mind that had nothing to do with Islam.
Which Nation of Islam?
Nothing to do with Islam.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And then, so now he doesn't know that.
Yeah.
And it's only really after Elijah Muhammad's, some of their kids go to the Middle East to get educated in Islam.
Yeah.
And actually come back and say, Dad, what you're preaching is not Islam.
Yeah. Well, now I know the Nation of Islam and the Garveyite movement wasn't in the early 20th century. There was a lot of religious political movements in the country. So it wasn't uncommon that you had these figures like Garveyite, even in white Christian circles, they had these figureheads. Now,
there was actually another group, and I'm going to have to look at my index to actually find it. One of them was Noble Drew Ali, and he... the Nordic, where they? I can't. Oh, the Moorish temple was his thing.
The Moorish temple,
yeah. And I'm not seeing what I'm looking for.
Now, you do mention that his time in prison in your book is overstated, that he wasn't as much of a rebel in reality that he states in his autobiography.
That appears to be true, and he gets out early, and so you wouldn't have gotten out early if you would have been a horrible prisoner, and you wouldn't have been transferred to that easier prison.
The easier prison that had the library.
You just wouldn't. I can tell you now, I didn't work in the Massachusetts system, but I did work in the Pennsylvania system. Yeah, if you were a troublemaker, it was not going to go well.
Gotcha. So that was overstated, sort of his... for his testament that he was redeemed. He wants to make himself worse than he maybe actually was.
Well, it probably wasn't all that pleasant
but,
to be incarcerated and to deal with the things he was dealing with. But maybe to make it more dramatic and the transformation more profound.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate because I think the transformation for him is profound regardless.
Okay. All right. One last thing about his time in prison and his conversion. It's stated that white Christianity is seen as a powerful tool of the racist they-self in brainwashing the Negro into passivity and dependence. How was his anti-Christian belief, his attachment to white Christianity, a purpose for him joining the Nation of Islam?
Well, because
was it?
I mean, you have to keep in mind, first of all, the Ku Klux Klan is a religious organization.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought it was more political.
It's a religious. I mean, they talk about Jesus and all this stuff. And so the idea of the white church, and in black liberation theology and in black theology generally, the focus is on Exodus. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh, let my people go.
Right.
With Christianity being Pharaoh in a way, in a sense of keeping them. There's a powerful scene in Spike's film where Malcolm's in Harlem and he's waiting outside a church, and when he confronts the guy and he says, "Oh, wait a second, you just came on. There's no salvation out here. Nothing's changed, huh? How about you come down to the temple and listen to what we have to offer?"
That's in the movie?
Yeah, it's this idea that, it's almost a Marxist idea that, though I wouldn't say that Malcolm was a Marxist, but that this idea of that religion is the opiate of the people. Religion becomes the thing that anesthetizes one's existence in a way to make it less difficult to deal with, or perhaps easier to deal with because of the notion of the cross and forgiveness.
Did he have the view that black Christians were Uncle Toms, or was he not that extreme about it?
Probably.
Probably, okay.
Or this idea that, what do they say, these so-called chicken Negro leaders, however he would put it, saying the idea that forgiveness and turn the other cheek, he said, no, we don't turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
Which is, it's all to say, no, we are not going to normalize this kind of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to be distracted because it doesn't change anything. And that's why I would say that to some degree he's more important than Dr. King. But you could probably also make the argument, if scholars have, that Dr. King probably doesn't get killed. Well, maybe doesn't get killed. If he doesn't become more political and focused on economic inequalities.
Right.
When he's going to Memphis to talk about, with striking garbage workers. So it's not I Have a Dream anymore. We forget that there's about 3 years after that speech where Dr. King changes. And they're evidently, and maybe it was legitimate, the fear that Malcolm and Dr. King were going to join forces. There is a point when Dr. King and Malcolm meet.
Yeah. They only met once, right?
Just once. And I believe it was either directly after or directly before the I Have a Dream speech.
Oh, wow.
So this would have been like 65. So Malcolm, maybe even 64. I'm blanking. I think 64 was the date of the I Have a Dream speech.
Oh.
So Malcolm had already been, by that time he's probably out of the nation or just about out. And he and Dr. King had this quick talking. But supposedly what was said was Malcolm says that by me talking like I do, they have to talk to you because they don't want to talk to me. And so he saw that he could create some cover for Dr. King in a sense and help him.
Yeah.
Because
good cop, bad cop.
Because he would be right. He would be more controversial.
Yeah.
And Dr. King obviously was not willing to go there.
Yeah.
But could still put the pressure on like he did. And in the end, that's probably why they were both killed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have to say, Martin Luther King, his I Had a Dream speech, and the idea that character matters,
of course,
is, that's what he's always known for. But, ironically...
if you think about the issue of character in the Christian church, how can one have character as a preacher and not fight against racism?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think it's interesting. I read a child's biography on Maya Angelou, and I just found this out in that I work for Oasis Mentoring, and I read with my kid who's 10 years old, and it's like she worked for both Martin Luther King and for Malcolm X, and they both were assassinated before she began to work for him. So she was hired by both.
No, she met Malcolm in Ghana.
Yes. But she was going to work for him in Mosque, U.S. or one of the organizations. He had two organizations. Right. Well, anyway. Okay, thank you for listening. As always on Guy on Indy, we invite you to listen in. Next up, Chapter 6, Minister Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. Guy on Indy. This is Guy Thomas Lowry's version of Life Not Lame. It's not about the money, it's not about the fame. I just think it's funny to live a life not lame. But life sure has its burdens, not all of them to share. My advice, don't worry, just live your life and be aware.